Have you ever thought about what it was like to live long ago? In particular, what was it like to be a eunuch in Imperial China? Well, even though they were not important, these amazing people had a much more interesting and complicated life than most people would think. This will show you the secret life of eunuchs during the peak of Imperial Chinese rule. It will also talk about the unique role they played in society, the problems they faced, and how they started to lose power in the late Qing Dynasty. With that said, welcome to Ancient Tone. There have been numerous societies throughout history that have viewed the eunuchs as a mysterious and misunderstood group, and Imperial China was not an exception. One definition of a eunuch is a castrated man, especially one formerly employed in certain Oriental courts as a harem guard or palace official. This definition comes from the Oxford English Dictionary. In other words, eunuchs were men who had undergone surgical castration in order to serve in a variety of capacities within the official government and palace of Imperial China. In spite of the fact that eunuchs have frequently been portrayed as cowardly or feeble, the reality of their life and the roles they played in Imperial China was significantly more complicated, frequently acting in the capacities of counselors, administrators, or even political operatives. Eunuchs were an integral part of the palace and government, playing a key role in their operations. Eunuchs, on the other hand, were ostracized and marginalized in Chinese society, occupying a social class that was distinct from both men and women. This was the case despite the fact that they were extremely important. In ancient times, emperors and high-ranking officials would hire male workers who had been castrated in order to secure their devotion. This practice is considered to be the genesis of eunuchs. In the beginning, this technique was utilized as a form of insurance against the possibility of a coup or insurrection. However, with time, it evolved into a method of establishing a specialized class of slaves and bodyguards who were only devoted to the monarch. Eunuchs were the elite inner circle of advisors to Chinese emperors for millennia, held practically unrivaled control over court affairs, and functioned as the inner circle of counselors to the Chinese palace. It was the responsibility of a great number of eunuchs to maintain the confidentiality of imperial secrets and even to carry out covert operations on behalf of the prince. As an additional point of interest, eunuchs were responsible for managing the majority of the day-to-day activities of the palace. Furthermore, many of them had positions of tremendous authority and prestige, frequently ascending to become some of the most powerful persons in the imperial court. It was notably true during the Qing Dynasty, as eunuchs were responsible for governing entire government agencies or even regions within China. This strong position was especially prevalent during that time. Therefore, they were an important factor in the political, economic, and cultural life of Imperial China. There were a number of reasons why eunuchs were highly respected in Imperial China. In addition to their loyalty, one of the reasons was that they were thought to lack both political and familial ambition. Eunuchs were unable to have children or start their own families because they were castrated. This prevented them from having children. It was because of this that they did not have the same connections to the military or the nobility as other males in Chinese society that they did. As a consequence of this, eunuchs were regarded as more trustworthy and, as was indicated earlier, less likely to be driven by personal ambition or the desire to establish a dynasty of their own. Because of this quality, they were seen to be more devoted to the emperor and the government, which made them appealing candidates for positions of administration and advisory function. Not only that, but because they were believed to be outsiders of the established gender structure, eunuchs often had a low social rank. They were more replaceable than other members of the palace staff due to their low social position, which contributed to their perceived worth. This distinctive quality, if you can call it that, was a factor that contributed to their perceived value. They might therefore be readily replaced or even killed without provoking the same level of indignation or backlash as would be the case if a member of the nobility or the military were handled in the same manner. This is because they are extremely vulnerable to being replaced or killed. Having said that, I would not want to be in their position at any point in time. However, in societies that had both harems and eunuchs, the latter were frequently employed as slaves in the harem. This is a bit of a dark and ironic spin on the situation. However, in order to prevent the eunuchs from developing intimate personal relationships with the women who worked in the palace or the harem, they were required to live in isolation and apart from the rest of the population, without exception. Eunuchs were also frequently employed in the function of guards in harems. Their primary responsibility was to guarantee that no unauthorized individuals were allowed to enter the harem and pose a risk to the safety of the women who were housed there. Eunuchs in Imperial China were subjected to the procedure of castration, which played a significant role in their daily life. To guarantee that eunuchs remained physically and sexually immature, they were often castrated at an early age, frequently as young as 8 or 9 years old. This was done in order to accomplish this. In addition to the removal of the testicles, the castration procedure itself was quite a gruesome procedure that frequently included the loss of the penis as well. Because the process was typically carried out without the use of any type of anesthesia or other pain-relieving medication, it was not unusual for eunuchs to pass away as a consequence of the operation or as a consequence of an infection that occurred thereafter. In Imperial China, the practice of castration of eunuchs was not without its share of controversy. The practice was regarded as cruel and barbaric by a significant number of individuals, both within and outside of China. In addition, there were many who believed that it was a violation of human rights of the people. The practice of castrating eunuchs endured in Imperial China for a significant number of centuries, notwithstanding the criticism that was leveled against it. It was not until the end of the Qing Dynasty in the early 20th century that the eunuch system was fully eradicated from the Chinese legal system. In Imperial China, the eunuchs held a social position that was distinct and frequently fraught with difficulties. On the one hand, they were frequently trusted and revered by the government as well as the emperor, and some of them were able to exert a substantial amount of authority and influence with their positions. On the other hand, they were considered to be social outcasts in Chinese society because they were not considered to be neither completely masculine nor completely female. The eunuchs found it challenging to cope with their social seclusion, and many of them had a difficult time establishing a feeling of belonging in their community. Some eunuchs were able to amass riches and influence, despite the fact that they were relatively low on the social hierarchy. Furthermore, this was especially true for those individuals who held high-ranking posts within the government or the palace. Through the use of their connections to the emperor, these eunuchs were able to obtain access to resources and opportunities that were not available to other people. As a result, eunuchs in Imperial China did have an opportunity, albeit a very small one, to climb up the social ladder from their position as slaves at the bottom of the hierarchy to that of prominent men in their own right. During the late Qing Dynasty, which ruled China from 1644 until 1912, the number of eunuchs in the palace began to decrease. This was despite the fact that they held a significant amount of power and influence under Imperial China. Many factors contributed to the decline in eunuch numbers, including the increasing influence of Western ideas regarding human rights and dignity, more prevalent national sentiment against the eunuch practice, improvements in women's rights, which allowed women to obtain an education and eventually become more involved in palace and government affairs, thus making it less necessary for the emperor to rely on eunuchs as intermediaries and advisors, and lastly, the overall general decline of the Qin. During the year 1912, the Qing Dynasty was brought to its knees. During this period of time, the number of eunuchs who were employed by the imperial government had decreased to a mere 470. With the dissolution of the previous ruling body and the establishment of the new government of the Republic of China, the archaic practice of employing eunuchs within the palace was finally put to a stop. Sun Yaoting, the last imperial eunuch, lived to the ripe old age of 105 before passing away in December of 1996, according to what is documented in the records. Despite this, the legacy and story of the eunuchs in China continues to live on, and they continue to be a fascinating and contentious aspect of the history of China. It is a rare opportunity to gain insight into the lives and experiences of these one-of-a-kind individuals, and the secret existence of the eunuchs in Imperial China provides this opportunity. We receive insight into the deep aspects of their lives, which is a facet of Chinese history and culture that is frequently disregarded. These nuances include negotiating a perilous political terrain and being castrated by medical professionals during their lives. In spite of the difficulties and obstacles they encountered, eunuchs were able to persevere and discover agency within the context of their situation. Even though the majority of people did not acknowledge their contributions, they were extremely important to the functioning of Imperial China. In this way, the lives of the eunuchs are not wasted, since they teach us a vital lesson in overcoming adversity and remaining resilient in the face of adversity. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here